Thank you very much. So welcome back to the second session. Welcome back also to those who are following on internet. This second session, as you can see, I'm the only one from ECHA this time. So as the chair, I'm very happy to have speakers from either companies or laboratories, or Marko, who is from the Chamber of Commerce in Austria. So we'll have a variety of point of views and information being brought to your attention. Before we start, we have a poll again with Slido. So you are being asked a series of questions, and we would like to know whether the REACH registration has brought any benefits to your company. I hope it has, actually. So you have a number of questions, and we will see the result at the end of the session. So we have 4 presentations, and as usual, we will have the Q&A session after these 4 presentations. So the first speaker is Dr. Willemien WIELAND. Mrs. WIELAND works in Charles River Laboratories, and previously known as NOTOX. And Mrs. WIELAND is a regulatory toxicologist, and she assists companies in preparing dossier and also in all kind of REACH-related issues covering data gap analysis, read across, evaluation of toxicological data, and also consortium management. And Mrs. WIELAND, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. Welcome back from coffee, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank ECHA for the opportunity to talk to you today on how to get your data together. Well, actually, I hope I will not be able to tell you something new today, because that means you really get your act together and you're well on track. In case you're not so far, I will try to give you some hints today on how to minimize the time spent to prepare a dossier. So today I will talk about 4 different topics. First of all, substance identity. Then I will talk about preparation of a member dossier or a lead dossier. And then I will, upon request of ECHA, I will give you some final notes on how to select a partner in the process. Now, first about substance identity. This is key to every registration, so it's very important to focus on this aspect of your dossier. So basically, the substance identity is that you show that your substance actually is what you think it is. And furthermore, you show if impurities are present and which impurities are present, if there are any present, and in which quantity. So in this aspect, it can be very helpful to know your production process, because the production process will give you valuable clues to find ways to address the impurities present. So the substance ID is basically about the substance name, of course. Furthermore, you need to add formula and structural formulas. Of course, this is not applicable if you have a UVCB. Then you need to add your spectral data set. In general, this is UV-Vis, infrared, NMR. So in some cases, you will not find a spectrum, for example, in your infrared. And in this case, it is also important to add this information to your dossier, because you show that indeed you have no spectrum, and you show that there are no impurities present in the infrared spectrum. Then finally, you have to add additional analytics to further identify and quantify your substance itself and the impurities present. Now, the techniques used here are very variable and depend on your production process. For example, you can add chromatography like LCMS, GCMS. But in some cases, if you expect that water is present, you also have to add Carl-Fischer titration. Now let's continue with how to prepare a member dossier. So if you work on a member dossier, it means that the lead is present. The substance is already registered. So that's really good news in some cases. You can find the lead via REACH-IT, via the ECHA website, and sometimes even via Google. First step you need to do is to ask the lead for the CIF agreement and evaluate the CIF agreement. Now, there are some things that you have to pay attention to. First of all, that you have to check the quality of the dossier. Now, this can be done via the disseminated files on the ECHA website. So if you do not agree with how a certain endpoint is filled, you can consider to opt out. So in the end, you will still be responsible as a registrant for the dossier you submit, even if you are a member. So furthermore, there are other aspects. You have to check how the costs are calculated, should be fair, transparent, and non-discriminatory. And you can, for example, check what the obligations of the lead are. Then you pay for your letter of access, and then you will get data from the lead. These data can be used to prepare your dossier. You only have to include company-specific data, for example, on the role you have. For example, you can be a manufacturer, importer, OR. You have to add your yearly tonnages, sites if you manufacture in Europe, and your SDS, unless it is shared, of course. If you are above 10 ton, you also have to add the CSR. So, in many cases, the lead will provide a template for your CSR. In that case, you will have to check the CSR template, whether or not the uses you have are covered. And in this respect, it's important to know the uses in your full supply chain, so everything is covered. So then, of course, you submit, and you're done. Now let's continue with the lead dossier. This is a whole different thing. So a lead dossier is not easy to prepare. It's a lot of work. You will need a lot of expertise, and it's a lot like climbing a mountain. You don't really know what to expect in advance, but it's very important to be well prepared. So in any case, the goal should be to prepare a compliant dossier, a time and cost-efficient way. So the key elements of any lead dossier are, apart from the substance identity, which I talked about before, you'll need to add administrative information, which is the same as for a member dossier. And also you have to add information on physicochemical properties, on environmental fate of your substance, ecotox and human toxicology parameters. Then you have to add the classification of your substance based on the data you have. And if you're above 10 ton, you'll have to do a PPT assessment and a chemical safety assessment. So the first step would be to inform potential co-registrant that you intend to prepare a registration dossier. Because you do not want to end up in a situation where two companies are spending money to do the same test work. So here I want to discuss some things that you can do on the first day you start with your dossier that will save time in the end. So first of all is work on your substance identity. I am stressing it again because it's very important. Once you know your substance, you know what you're going to test in your tests, what test substance you can use in your tests. And furthermore, you can define the boundaries of your substance so you know which companies can join as members. Then you can evaluate your substance. So first of all, maybe it is exempt. Maybe it's an Annex 3, so you only have to prepare physicochemical properties. Maybe it's re-import, in which case you are done, basically. Maybe it's a natural aquarium system without chemical modification, and also then you are exempt and you do not have to prepare a dossier at all. So maybe it's a polymer for which other registration, for which other things apply. Then you have to look at your test substance and look whether or not certain tests can be waived. So, for example, if you know that you have a very high or low pH, you already know that you do not have to do acute toxicity work. It can be waived. Maybe your substance is an inorganic, in which case you do not have to work on biodegradation properties, partition coefficient. Maybe your substance, you already know that your substance falls apart when it's in an aqueous solution. And in that case, you will have to think how you will address the ecotoxicity properties. Because if it falls apart, you'll have to test the individual products. Then, of course, I think it's been mentioned before, you do a literature search. Maybe there are valuable data around on your substance or on a substance analog, which can be used to fill an endpoint. Furthermore, you can address potential drawbacks by evaluating the structure. This can be done by QSARs like OECD Toolbox, a DEREC, or AP Suite. And this will give you an idea on the water solubility, for example. Or maybe your substance has an epoxide in it. This will give you a warning that potentially you'll end up with a positive result in your AIMS test. So it's really good to think ahead. So the outcome of this first day is a solid data gap analysis, and it will give you an idea on what time and what money you'll need to spend to get to your goal. So this is not an easy task, and in any case I would advise to seek expert advice if you do not have it in-house. And also, I've seen many data gaps and I've seen many surprises. So in any case, testing will give you the true answer to the endpoints. So let's talk about the testing phase. In any case, all testing should be performed according to OECD EC guidelines, and ecotox and human toxicology testing should be done according to in labs that work according to GLP principles. Now let's go into the details. Physicochemical properties for Annex 7 and 8 are the same, and it's basically water solubility, partition coefficient, density, these kind of things. And in general, it will take you about 3 months from start of your experiment until your final report. Ecotoxicity EFA testing. For your Annex 7, you'll need an acute daphnia and an algae test and a biodegradation test. Annex 8, you'll need additional tests like microbial testing, acute fish testing, potentially hydrolysis and adsorption-desorption screening. Again, this will take about 3 months. However, for some test work, for example, water solubility, partition coefficient, ecotox work, you'll need to detect your substance in the media, which means you'll need to develop a method, an analytical method to find your substances. Now, this can be a highly challenging task, and it can significantly increase the time you need to do the studies. So this is really something to take into account when you start preparing. So the human tox testing, Annex 7, it's basically the acute test work. So local tests and aims and acute toxicity testing. This will also take about 3 months. However, it is preferred to wait with your acute testing until you know whether or not, for example, your substance has corrosive properties, in which case you do not have to do the acute oral studies. Furthermore, at this point, for skin sensitizing properties, we need to do a stepwise approach, which means that we will start with, for example, this is a very limited approach, but you start with 2 in vitro tests, which will take you also about 2 months. Maybe if you do not have a clear answer yet, you can follow this up with another in vitro test. So if in any of these tests there are indications that your substance has skin sensitizing properties, you'll have to follow this up with an in vivo study to determine the potency of your substance, which again will take you another 2 months. So as you can see, this is quite a long timeline, even for an Annex 7. So if you prepare an Annex 8, in addition, you have to do another acute route. You have to do a chromosome aberration test and a mouse lymphoma test. And of course, you have to do a repeat dose testing with screening for repro and developmental effects. This last test will take at least 5 or 6 months to complete. So in conclusion, testing of Annex 7 will take at least 4 months, and testing for Annex 8 will take you at least 5 months. So once you have all your data together, you can start preparing your dossier. Basically, you insert all the data you have, plus your company-specific data and your study summaries in Euclid. You can insert the conclusions and classification. So this will take some time, of course, it depends on the amount of data you have. Then, if you have more than 10 tons per year, you have to do your PBT assessment and derive PNEX and DNELs, which will take you about half a week to do. And then you have to perform a chemical safety assessment. And this can only be done once you have all your data in place, all your experiments are done, and you know exactly how your substance is used. So you have to include all the possible exposure scenarios. And of course, based on a number of exposure scenarios, it will take you less or more time. And also it depends whether or not your substance is classified or not. So the time needed when your testing is final, as a really rough estimation, can be about 40 hours for an Annex 7, but it can be 100 hours or much more for an Annex 8. So once you're done, run a validation assistant. Well, it has been said before, but it's really important. And then submit to ECHA. Well, again, you will have a check by ECHA, so then you don't know what's going to happen. So to conclude this talk, I would like to end with some notes on how to select a partner. So for test work, you'll need to find a contract research organization. You should choose a lab that has experience with OECD guidelines and works under GLP, obviously. Furthermore, depending on the substance you're going to test, you should ask for experience in the lab. For example, if you have a pigment with low water solubility, make sure that the lab has experience with this, because the test work is not only about following OECD guidelines, there's a lot more to it, actually. Then, at this point, it's very important to check availabilities. I know that the labs are fully booked at the moment, so make sure you know what to expect. If you want to hire a consultant, I think it's been mentioned before, ECHA published a checklist, but they also have a practical guide for SME managers where it is nicely described what kind of knowledge is needed when you want to prepare a dossier. In any case, you want to look for a multidisciplinary team. You need specialists from chemistry, from ecotox, and from toxicology to get everything together. You should check the experience of the team. So they should have worked on a significant number of lead dossiers. And it's very beneficial if they have worked with ECHA before on substance evaluations. Then again, also here, check the availability and the flexibility of the team. And as a last point, but I think it's very important, make sure you have a click with the consultant you work with. So the consultant should understand you, and you should build up a trust relationship, because this really helps in working efficiently. So this was a bit in a rush, but I hope I covered everything for dossier preparation. If you have any more questions, feel free to contact us. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Willemien, for this very practical information, and it's also very useful to see the time to spend to do the dossier and to ask for the tests. So the next speaker is Marko SUŠNIK. Marko is an advisor for chemical law and chemical policies within the Austrian Federal Economic Chamber. He's involved with a lot of topics, so I mean you can ask Marko many questions about REACH, CLP, nanotechnology, biocide, pesticide, and fertilizer. So at least you cover everything. At the European level, Marko works in numerous expert groups and is very much focused on the impact of chemical legislation on SMEs. And in this context, he's advised UEPME. And Marko is also part of the director contact group where we discuss a number of issues that may impact companies and especially SMEs. So Marko, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for the very kind presentation of myself and for the invitation to speak here. Good noon, good morning. I would like to talk to you about a very special topic which I have worked on for quite a while now. This is data sharing, cost sharing, and especially in relation to the upcoming REACH 2018 deadline. In that sense, well, who's interested, the two slides show you my affiliation, where I come from, and why I'm standing here. So in brief, I'm working now for, let's say, good 10 years with chemical legislation. I'm also a chemist. That about me, an overview, and I would like to give you now a short overview about what I will talk in the next 14 minutes. I would like to give you some quick basics about data and cost sharings. And if I say quick, it's going to be very quick. And then I would like to go to some experiences, thoughts, and recommendations, which, as you will see, will also be a bit subjective from my point of view, how I see the things from all the experience I gained in the last years. And then I would like to close with available support. And let's start with the quick basics. REACH requires sharing of costs for animal study data, but also for any other costs, any other studies of new entrants. And any other studies if a new entrant requests that. So basically, REACH data sharing is about minimizing tests and with that costs. That process starts in a CF or with an inquiry. You heard about that before. Then, it's very important now for the upcoming slides, cost sharing must be fair, transparent, and non-discriminatory, whereas specifically the part on transparency is going to be a very important one, as you will see. It is also important to say that when we are talking about cost sharing, we are not talking about the marketplace. So you're not buying information, you are not trading information. It's about an obligatory cost sharing mechanism for regulatory purposes, which also has to follow certain formalized minimum standards. Very often I get a question by companies what typical costs are. In the end, the answer is, well, let's say straightforward. You usually start, depends. And no one will give you an answer which is straightforward. So far, we still have some numbers which you can use as a kind of indication. A data package for 1 to 10 tons is between 30 to 70,000 euros. A data package for 1 to 100 tons is going to be around 300 to 500,000 euros per substance. I'm totally aware that the costs can be also higher, they can be also lower, whereas it's going to be more often a bit higher than lower, as the figures you see here. These costs are related to testing costs. You should not oversee that they are also administration costs, which can sometimes even double the whole costs for testing. Just to give you one of the most expensive examples that I've seen for 2010, which was around 5 million for the whole data set. 60% were for data and 40% were for administration of the consortium. So for the body where the data sharing is happening, was only for the administration. It's quite a lot. As I said before, cost sharing is not a marketplace. The basic idea about this is every registrant should pay a share, not more, but also not less. That means that data owners should get compensated for their costs, and that's very important. It's about compensation. So that also means the data owners should not set arbitrary or profit-oriented prices. On the other hand, co-registrants should not haggle. It's not a bazaar. And it's also important that co-registrants should pay only for the data they need. So for example, if you're registering 1 to 10 tons, you should not be obliged to pay for a data package, for example, about 1,000 tons, where the costs are significantly higher. It's very important for you to know. The question is always, what if the price is too high? So first of all, too high is relative. It's also very subjective. What for one company is going to be too high, for the other is going to be fine. And it is important to know that a very expensive dossier may be fair. That the costs will be simply high because the testing of the substance is simply expensive. And you can have a very cheap letter of access, which may be unfair. Then is the question, does it matter for you? Do you want to discuss that? Anyway, if you want to have more clarity about the costs, you have the legal right, according to the so-called data sharing regulation, that's the regulation 2016-9. It's a very important regulation in matters of data cost sharing, that you ask for a transparent breakdown of the costs, of a detailed breakdown of the costs. And it's always very important that you clearly communicate if you have doubts, that you tell the data owners, that you tell the lead registrant what are your problems with the costs that are being presented to you. So for example, if somebody is charging you for a data package of 1 to 1,000 tons, for 1 to 10 tons per year, like 100,000 euros, that I would say it's probably too high if you consider that average costs are around 30 to 70,000 euros per substance. Briefly, the data sharing regulation, what does it include? It clarifies minimum rules on transparency, that's a very important bit. It's relatively detailed about what transparency means, then a bit more general about fairness and non-discrimination. And there are also minimum criteria for data sharing agreement, like justification, itemization of data, and related costs. So they should be quite clear from there, from the papers that you get, from the bookkeeping that you get, or from the breakdown that you get, what are testing costs and what are administration costs. And there should be also a reimbursement mechanism in every data sharing agreement. Documentation needs to be kept for 12 years, and there's also something about the so-called OSHE principle, which is now, I mean, it's related to the data sharing, but it's more a registration issue, a more general registration issue. I see now two main scenarios for 2018 that you should consider. The first one, which is, in my opinion, the easier one, you're entering an existing registration. So probably the letter of access will be the best option. Prices for letter of access, especially for substances that have been registered already in 2010 and 2013, should be pretty stable and transparent by now, so it's easier to calculate with that. You should be aware, I would like to repeat it again, you have any right not to accept an existing data cost-sharing agreement. So if somebody is telling you that you have to sign something, that you have to accept any costs, that's simply wrong. The data sharing regulation is clear on that. But on the other hand, you should be also aware if you're blocking a process, you will also block your own registration, especially if you have no proper reasons, no proper arguments for that. So you should be careful to use this lever of not accepting a data sharing agreement. Some may have some troubles, but most of them are fair and good ones. If you feel uncomfortable about your data cost sharing process, then you should in no case waive your rights of the data sharing regulation. This is also a possibility that's there to make administration less, to make the processes faster, that you basically say you're waiving your rights for a cost breakdown, that you're waiving your rights for a reimbursement mechanism, but you really have to actively do that. You have to sign a paper on that. Personally, I would do that only when I feel certain that things are fair in my CF, in my data sharing process. The second scenario is a more tricky one. You are starting a totally new registration, so where there is no lead registrant. So basically somebody has to start to become the lead registrant. There you can assume that you won't have many partners. If you have 2 partners, that's usually quite lucky. That also means that costs per registrants will be probably high, so you shouldn't be surprised that also for a substance between 1 and 10 tons, per registrants the costs will be 10, 20, 30, 40,000 euros. And you also should be aware that things won't just happen or will be done by others, because simply there are no others, and if there is somebody else, there's going to be some other person in another corner of the European Union, and you have to communicate with this person. And as you have seen in the last presentation, 4 or 5 months for testing is a very optimistic time frame. That means you have to be proactive. The deadline is approaching. In that instance, cooperation is key, and that's a general aspect in the data sharing process. What sounds a bit kind of like teaching you ethics, respect your co-registrant, is also a matter of survival in the REACH process. You should not try to put people under pressure, to trick them on costs, because in the end, as you also heard, for example, in Christo's presentation, you will have to work for a long time with all the registrants, either in the evaluation of your testing proposals, or in the substance evaluation, or in any other evaluation processes. You should react on requests, and also others should react on the request. You should be aware of this. This is an obligation, and it's not only a matter of politeness, and this is also very important in matters of later of the so-called dispute mechanism. I will come to that later. In the end, if you disagree, you should be transparent about your reason and constructing when you try to find another solution that is more appropriate for you. Blocking a process will block the process for everybody, and that includes, in the end, you, what is kind of tricky when we only have 4 months to go. Nevertheless, you should be aware that you have to defend your rights. You should pay only for that what is necessary to be compliant. If you are registering for 1 to 10 tons, you should pay only for this data package, full stop. That means that you should make yourself familiar with your specific obligations, with your specific needs. You should be also sure that the data quality is sufficient for your needs, that it's adequate for your needs. If you have your own data, you don't have to pay twice. You can use this data. You can even feed it in for data sharing. The cost breakdown I mentioned before that you can always do if you have doubts. And the waiving of rights I also mentioned before. Some other aspects. Confidential business information is always an issue. You should only discuss what is necessary during the cost data sharing negotiations. You have certain mechanisms how to protect your information, and you should inform yourself if you think that you could disclose any of such information before you act. Would be too much to talk about this now. And I also would like to mention competition law. That's also very important in matters of costs data sharing. Some information is critical. That could be also interesting to define a key for the cost shares, like production volumes, exact production volumes, market shares. That's also information that is critical in respect to competition law. Don't exchange it. In the end, you also have to get yourself familiar with the obligation in European competition law. Put everything on paper, what you're negotiating, so that you can prove that you've done everything right. And in the end, it's not about the meeting only. If you're having dinner with the colleagues, with the co-registrants, the same applies. Don't exchange critical information. If things go wrong, ECHA offers a dispute mechanism. Use it. You can use it without a lawyer. You can start it online. But you will have to present your story to ECHA. You will have to convince ECHA that you have done everything necessary. Then ECHA has certain powers to let you proceed with your registration. The most difficult thing will be to prove your case. So if you get no answer from your co-registrants, insist. Put it down on paper, keep written notes to document your efforts, and set also reasonable deadlines for answers. But again, document it. You will need it to prove your case. Before things go wrong, get yourself familiar also with the guidance on data cost sharing. You have example, what is, for example, testing costs, what are, for example, costs for administration. Also, the data sharing regulation is important, and what you have heard before, checklist to hire a good consultant. Eventually, you will need external support by a consultant. No shame with that. It's quite a complicated task. With that, thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Marko, for this very clear presentation. I think that I've seen my colleagues in data sharing listening very carefully, and I think we would not have said a word differently, so thank you very much. I don't know, Jonathan, maybe you will have to provide replies at a later stage, but thank you. So our next speaker is Mrs. Silvia della Fiorentina. Silvia holds a degree in biotechnology. She worked in different places in university, but also at Federchemica, which is the Italian Federation of the chemical industry. And now Silvia has worked for Faravelli Group since 2010, and also different positions like health and safety manager, fine chemicals regulatory, and rich CLP expert. So Silvia, the floor is yours. You will talk about how an SME can make it.
Thanks. And thanks for inviting us here. Good morning, everyone. I am Silvia della Fiorentina. I am the HIC manager of Giusto Faravelli S.p.A, the Italian headquarters of the group Faravelli. Faravelli is a distributor and importer company of raw materials for all the application fields, from pharmaceutical to fine chemicals. REACH regulation has a kind of double face. For my granny, who is watching a social advertising on TV, REACH is a hero who will protect our health and environment, who will avoid the use of very hazardous substances and will avoid the use of animal testing. But for us, as a company, REACH means also this and more. And of course, approaching the 2018 deadline, REACH means registrations. That can be a lot for small and medium enterprises, which usually handle small and medium tonnages. We, as Faravelli, started in 2015, running like if we were in 2017 to be ready in 2018. 3 years ago, we started thinking about our current situation and asking ourselves, how many substances do we have to register? And do we have a parallel business to compensate the cost of the registrations? But we also thought about our future. Will we have to cut our portfolio at the end? Or will we have to invest on some leading products only? But despite of this smart start, we arrived now in January 2018 with 3 or 4 substances without a specific destiny. It seems really trivial, but according to our experience, the dialogue along the supply chain is vital to perform a registration. We are distributors and importers, so we must trust in the intention to register of our suppliers. But even if we trust them, we created a so-called safety net. This net is composed by all the spam-like emails we receive along these 10 years from SIF, because every single email has been sent by someone who is interested in the registration of that raw material, and for us is a potential alternative supplier. But it is also composed by the test we have already done regarding the substance identity of some specific raw material, and the contacts that we have already taken with some lead registrant, some SIF facilitator, consortium, and so on. And of course, money that we have already saved to go for the registration for those raw materials. Another question is that even if there is the possibility to replace the supplier with another one which is in compliance with the regulation, this possibility is real for us because maybe downstream users don't want to change the raw material at the last minute, or we cannot find another supplier with a so good raw material as the first one. In that case, we as regulatory affairs maybe cannot do anything, because some particular matters of this kind can be solved only with money, only with sales and purchasing people, so we will have to call them and let them try to solve those particular matters. Downstream users. For us, the uses of every downstream user are the real driving force of our REACH machine. Because, for example, we have customers that in the same line produce medicine for dogs and shampoo for dogs. So we have to know the specific final use of every single kilos we sell them of a particular raw material. And the uses are important also to know which kind of registration we will have to perform. Because, believe or not, we have a supplier that didn't take into consideration the possibility that one of his raw material has been used for years as a transported isolated intermediate, and he risked to lose that business because they cannot afford a full registration. While knowing these particular uses, they can save part of it, registering the substance with a simplified registration. And another important dialogue to take into consideration for the registration is the dialogue with SIF and consortia, of course. Even in this case, according to our experience, have the information for the registration is quite easy if you pre-register your substance, because you can go on Reach IT, you can try to contact the components of the SIF and asking them some information, the intention to register, and so on. But if we didn't pre-register a substance, we have, of course, go through the inquiry. And now time is our worst enemy, because as already told, there are only 4 months, and the inquiry is a process to follow, is something that can be really slow for some reasons. So the only advice in this case is to do it immediately, as soon as we can, and try to solve this particular matter in the less time, in the very, very immediately. I'm sorry. And when we find our consortium, how can we know that the prices, the costs are really fair? Because it happened to us to have the doubt that the costs are inflated by something that we cannot know. Of course, we go through gentleman conversations, we send a lot of email, we call, our contact, because the last resort, the real last resort is the data sharing dispute, and we don't want to reach the dispute. Even because we have to prove all our efforts and all our email, all our efforts to have a result. So even this is a process to follow, and now there is no time to start something new and something really slow. And what about the last-minute urgencies? What we think that we can do to solve the last-minute matters are to try to save time to go for the registration and cover the demands of our customer, in sharing the quantity of the demands of our customer among our sister company, if, of course, the structure of the company allows it. Or to go for stock within the 31st of May to save time for the registration and go to the registration as soon as we can. Another possibility is to ask to the downstream users if they are willing to share the cost of the registration, because for some downstream user, to substitute the additive at the very last second can be more expensive than share the cost of the registration with the supplier. There is the possibility that if there are only some data gaps to fill, if the substance is part of a family of substances, and if there are only some tests that you have to fill, to use the read-across method. And the last idea we had is to create the dossier in an easier way, is to use the new platform ECA released in the last month, the Euclid Cloud for SME. It is a platform quite simple to use. It's 24/7 available. It has a support 24/7 available. And you can access to this cloud only with your ECA account credentials. So it is also easy to access. And you can share the information with your consultants. And at the end of the creation of the dossier, it can be uploaded directly on Reach IT from the cloud. And as a conclusion of this presentation, we would like to underline the importance of treasure all the experiences you had in these last 10 years in order to register your substance as soon as possible, maybe also within May. And that the dialogue along the supply chain is vital to clarify every single doubt and to simplify all the potential registrations. And of course, while we embrace the final scope of REACH regulation, especially because we don't want to disappoint our grannies, we must keep steady in order, of course, to go on and maybe start something better in the future. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Silvia, for giving us this perspective, this SME perspective, and see how you can manage to hold these requirements and giving us some tips how to manage at the last minute. Now, our last speaker is Jane Pors. So I don't know if I pronounce your name correctly, if it's Jane, but I hope so. Jane is Head of Quality, Compliance and Packaging at Flying Tiger Copenhagen, and will give us the point of view of a retailer. Jane holds an MSc in biology and has worked at a laboratory for a number of years, starting with ecotoxicology testing and also on product testing. So after 2 years, she working on her own consultancy company, she joined Zebra, where she built the compliance department. And we will have now again another point of view. The floor is yours.
Thank you. How do you do? And thank you for the invitation. I thought it was very nice and very challenging, so thank you. Yeah, as you just said, my name is Jane Pors. I have a master's degree in biology as a background, and I'm head of quality, product compliance and packaging at Zebra. And Zebra is the one owning all the Flying Tiger Copenhagen shops. We have now 861 stores in 28 countries. We mostly deal with non-EU suppliers. As you can see from the product range, we have a lot of different products, which also, of course, challenges us in the product compliance department quite a lot. And we also have quite a lot of numbers. So last year, we assessed and tested 5,500 new items. Until now, and that's basically before I joined the company, we had 6 registrations and 61 pre-registrations. Just a very quick glance on the buying process at Flying Tiger, and perhaps similar at other retailers. All our buyers come up with an idea. They find out whether it holds or not, and if it does, then they'll go on to the sourcing. During the sourcing, the CSR department comes into consideration. They have to sign the supplier code of conduct. And then the buyer actually initiate the BOM process at compliance, BOM, the bill of material process, where we get all the information on all the products that we have in our stores. That means that even before we started this REACH registration process, we'll still have the information about all our products. The BOM check actually goes back and forth a number of times to the suppliers, because mostly there are things in that we do not approve of in our compliance. Even though it's legal, perhaps it's a substance that we do not want in our products. When that's okay, it goes on to the testing part, and the artwork is created. If that is okay too, then we move on to the production, where again, it's quite complicated. It might be checked by our CSR department. It might be a quality control check by our inspectors in China. And if it's what we consider a high-risk item, we test it again during mass production. And if everything is okay, then we move on to shipment. Quite a complicated process, even though this is simplified. Okay, when we then started looking at these new registrations due to the low tonnage, We knew that we needed an extra employee with a chemical background, because then it's simply just so much easier to handle. We also needed a database. Until now, it was a huge Excel sheet. And we needed a database where we could automatically get the information about the amount imported to EU. We still have to put in manually the chemical information. Then we needed to find the very best consultant in our sense. It's been said a lot of times today, and I can only repeat it. It's crucial to us, at least. And then we needed a laboratory. We needed a laboratory that we could trust and that we knew that could do the analysis in the best way. And then we started being the detectives. We had this huge amount of data, and we needed to dig very deep into it. And what we looked at is which product did exactly this substance actually come from. Most often it came from several products. And having done that, we needed to go to the buyer and have that cooperation about, okay, is this actually something that we're going to buy again? Is it something that you want to have in the future? Are you considering changing the supplier? Because if you are, then we have to do it now. And actually that gave us the overview of which substance are we going to be looking at in the future. And also potentially then needed a registration. And we looked into 80 new registrations after that work. Then we looked at, okay, what could we do? 80 is a lot. It's also a lot of money. Okay, the easy way for the compliance department was to change to EU suppliers. I know I don't find the suppliers, our buyers do, and I know it's not easy to find EU suppliers for all our products. And from the compliance side, we have the experience that if we find the EU suppliers, if it's a trader that do not have their own production site, then it's extremely difficult to get the information. In S.p.A. in compliance, we have the chemical skills. And what we found often, if you find like a smaller trader in EU, perhaps they do not have that. And that makes it very, very hard. And but if they have their own production site here in EU, then it's at least they have that. Perhaps they won't tell us, but then we'll have to find a way to do that. Another possibility was to change to suppliers in China, for instance, that already had made the registrations. We have seen quite a number that did pre-registration, so perhaps we could go that way. Even though they had done some pre-registrations, we found that it was really hard to find suppliers with the right knowledge about registrations and REACH. If we asked them, of course, they would say yes, but then, by putting more questions into it, more specific questions, we found out that they didn't have that knowledge. So it was difficult for us to get the right information. The suppliers that already did the pre-registration, of course, we asked them whether they were going to move on to the registration part, and everybody said yes. However, in the end, we didn't trust them. And as time is moving quite fast, we think, in this sense, we didn't trust them. So we couldn't deal with that. There's only one, as a result, is that only one of our suppliers in cosmetics in China are doing the registrations. And they have their own factory, they only produce cosmetics, so they know what they're doing. But for all the others, we did it ourselves. Then we took a deep dive again into all this data. So we were looking at the different products. Could we use the same formulation for some of the products? Could we use some natural materials? Could we use more simple formulations on some of them? And could we use the same chemicals in more products? Pigments, for instance. And as I'm writing here, it requires a huge cooperation with buyers. If our buyers didn't respect what we say in compliance on how to buy, and especially what not to buy and not how to buy, then we couldn't have done this. It's really crucial. And just some examples of our decisions. Our paint came in 2 sizes, from 2 suppliers, and thereby, of course, in 2 formulations. So we settled for the one formulation that we approved of mostly in compliance. And then we just have one supplier and multiple of sizes. We sell a lot of different pens at Flying Tiger, and they came with different ink. So what we found was that we found an EU supplier in ink, also based in China. And now we sell all our pens with the same ink, and it doesn't matter if it's red or yellow or has the shape of a carrot, for instance. Or not carrot, because then you get into another complications, but then a ball. And then our pencils had synthetic graphite, and now we use natural. Most of our cosmetics came from China, and now most of it comes from EU. We use a lot of pigments, and some of them come in like big amounts because it's high. What do you call big products like slime and modeling clay. So we get the manufacturers to use the same pigments. Yeah, and of course, whenever we assess new products, we assess them according to the registrations that we are doing now. So it means that they will get into the same decisions that we have made so far. Then one special candle actually was containing a chemical that we couldn't change, so we had to skip that one because we would be the only registrant, and we don't want to be that. Results, we ended up with 20 new registrations instead of the 80. We found the right laboratory, and we got the quotations from the laboratory. And we have bought and are buying still our way into CF groups. And we have some chemicals in the analysis right now. Unexpected challenges. I'm just thinking. I didn't think that getting the samples of the raw materials from our suppliers would be a problem. But we actually face that in China. It's even though they're not toxic in any way, it's still illegal to get them out of the country. So we are struggling enormously with that. And then one of the chemicals that we needed registered was like owned by a Korean authority, and it's quite difficult to get that paid for. Luckily, we have a partner in Korea that could go to the post office to buy this, because that's the only way that we could actually do it. So that was something that we hadn't thought of, at least. Key learnings in the end. A consultant you can trust and work very closely with, I think, is essential. And then don't trust that your non-EU suppliers will register. As I said before, even though they've done the pre-registration, I don't think they'll move on, or only a very few of them will. And then, as I said again, a close relationship with the buyers is also essential. Because the buyers, we give them few opportunities to do that job while doing this. Then I know that we are a big company. I mean, S.p.A has the size that actually get the suppliers to do what we want them to do. So it's so much more difficult to be small and medium-sized. And then in the end, it takes time, much more than you think, and much more than we have thought. So to start with, it really takes time. Yeah, that was it.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It's very detailed and very instructive, actually. So with that, I would like to open the question and answers. We have approximately 30 minutes. As for the previous session, we ask you to come to the microphone and introduce yourself. You can also ask a question via Slido. Our colleagues will pass questions if nobody asks from the room. I would like to remind you of the poll. I mean, last time I looked, there were 70 people approximately who had replied. So if you could reply to the poll, that would be very nice. And with that, I invite you to come to the microphone. So who will break the ice? Oh, that's it. We have one person coming.
Sarah Hottenroth from Umicore. Sorry, in one of the presentations it was mentioned that we could fill the stock before the deadline and then continue selling. I just wanted to know for the legal boundaries of that. Would that be true that we could import up to 100 tons before the deadline, stop importing, continue selling afterwards, and then do the registration and then continue to do the business? And would that apply for manufacturing as well?
Is there any other question? Otherwise, I would like, maybe Cyril, are you ready to? Oh, there is, sorry, I have not seen you, sorry.
Hi, yeah, I'm Jenny from Collart. My question is for formulators. I want some advice on where we stand with chemicals that are going to be pre-registered, then after the deadline, if they're not pre-registered, where we stand with the chemicals that we have in our factories. Thank you.
So, Cyril, are you ready to reply? Cyril, no, he's not ready to reply, so are you? Yes. Because I assume it was more a question for Eka than anybody else.
Good morning, Cyril Jacquet from the legal department. It's a very uncomfortable question for a lawyer because my personal view is that indeed I think the registration obligation in principle, according to Article 5, applies to manufacturing and placing on the market. So now the interpretation has been discussed and agreed in the line of what you were saying. So actually the position is that the piling up of stock can be done before the deadline and then sold or used after the deadline. So there is this placement on the market that is still posing an issue, but the position has been the one that you have been saying, and that has been the case since 2010, if I remember. Is that clear? It's okay?
There was another question, Cyril, about the pre-registered substances. and what is their status that have not been registered? Huh? That's the question you were asking.
I'm sorry, I was looking for information.
Can you please repeat
Can you repeat
your
the question, please?
Because I think it's for you also.
Yeah.
Yeah, my question was about chemicals that have been pre-registered and then the suppliers don't register them, where we stand then if for the formulator where we don't have a pre-registration in place and we were relying on our suppliers.
So I think we have a DCG solution on that one, if I understand well. Basically, you have been relying as a supply, as a downstream users on the pre-registration of your supplier, and at the end of the day, close to the deadline, you say, well, finally, I'm getting away, right? So this is covered by one of the point that we were making this morning, and then I will invite you to go on the DCG webpage this morning. More information on the conditions to benefit from these solutions were uploaded, so you will have the information on the specific condition there, but this has been planned. That was already the case in 2013, if I remember well, so that has been already implemented. Okay?
Thank you, Cyril. So, any other question? Or maybe you can look from Slido or from the internet if you have questions. We have new, wait a second, we have, so Jean-Philippe, can you?
Jean-Philippe Montfort-Meyer-Brown, since we are in the legal discussion, you mentioned that after 1st June 2018, the CIF will not be there anymore, and that's according to the legal text. So could you, maybe either Cyril or you, try to explain what will be the rule of the game within the people that have registered after 2018, if the CIF, which are kind of setting the rules, at least for data sharing, are no longer there? I don't think that it's so obvious to describe. Of course, for new substance, you have the inquiry process, but in terms of the data sharing disputes and whatever could come later on for new information that would be put in, you know, updated dossier and all of this, I think it would be nice to have some guidance as to what applies there. Is it old Scotch new rules kind of things, or, you know, what it is?
Maybe I can start, and Cyril, you can continue. That's a bit what I was saying in my presentation. Actually, there is no legal obligation to continue the CIF after June 2018. Having said that, the data sharing obligation continue. There are always newcomers. There are, as I was saying, there are approximately 3,000 new registration every year since 2010. So these people need data, or need to share the data. Plus there is the dossier evaluation where we request further information, and you need to discuss your data, you need to discuss your data set and to share the cost. Therefore, that's what I was saying in my presentation, it's strongly advisable, but we cannot force, but it's strongly advisable to keep a structure and call it CIF or not CIF. Nobody prevents you to continue the CIF. Give it the name that you want. So, I heard this morning that there were now joint submission agreements. Instead of having CIF agreements, the company was talking about joint submission agreements. And that should be clear, that how you cooperate between each other after 2018 needs to be clarified and put on paper, because it will come. And we strongly advise to continue the structure that are existing, because they have been existing for 10 years. Most of them have functioned pretty well, so they should continue. That would be our recommendation. I don't know if some of my colleagues, Erwin, you want to maybe comment on that? Maybe if you can come to the microphone.
Yes, Cyril Jacquet again. So you have two dimensions here. There is what happens on the contractual basis. So it's the relation between the operators that they have set up, they have shared data. And there is the regulatory aspect. So what means ECHA has in order to force people doing things. On the contractual aspects, that's what Christelle was insisting on this morning. This is what you control. That's what you master. That's what you agree on. So the rules that you are defining today will also apply to the situations that will come tomorrow. So we advise you to have strong, well-thought rules between the different operators, because that's what will apply in your relationship tomorrow, even after the end of the CIF. So again, you can call that whatever, it's consortium, CIF, it's not a problem. Now, concerning the regulatory aspect, for newcomers, so people that have not pre-registered a substance and therefore at the end of the phasing scheme, they are in the situation of any newcomer today. We have Article 27 that will impose on them to share the data with the other operators that are in the CIF. All these people have to make every effort to find an agreement, and in case of failure, they can seek a remedy before the agency. So there, it's in principle dealt with. Now for updates, you have to distinguish as well. I'm taking a bit of time, I'm going to go quick. You have two distinctions. The regulatory updates, so following a request from ECHA, compliance check decision or a substance evaluation decision. And you have the voluntary updates. Voluntary updates, the best remedy is most probably a contractual basis. For regulatory updates, you have a distinction between the people that have been asked to provide the data from those that have not been asked to provide the data. And that's the regulatory hook I was mentioning before. We may have some opportunity to force people that have been asked to provide the data to do something. And we are reflecting now to reinforce these mechanisms, to have a better teeth on those situations. And you have the situations for those people that were not asked to provide the information for maybe good reasons. Their use is not a concern for the reason for which a substance evaluation decision has been made. So, and that's again the contractual aspect that will resolve those situations. Is that fine? It's a bit complicated, but
yeah, but
okay.
Cyril, yes, thank you.
Hello, Erwin Annis, CEFIC. We have been discussing this also quite in length, and we do agree with what is written in the legal text. It's indeed written that the CIFS stops end of May of this year, but we don't find anything in the legal text which is hampering us to continue the activities. And we strongly recommend to reflect on that. It's extremely important. We have indeed the potential mandatory updates, as Cyril has been saying, the distinction between the requests coming from dossier evaluation, substance evaluation, or voluntary updates. We should also not forget that there is the aspect of additional cost sharing, which is there for 12 years after the registration deadline, meaning that for the 2018 registrations, we talk about potentially until 2030 that requests can come in on buying a letter of access. And we think that you should better reflect from this in a very early stage. We are working on further documents. We are also working at an improvement considering all these aspects in a new CIF agreement as CEFIC, and we are waiting in a certain way a little bit to an outcome of a discussion which will take place in the Commission and which will probably or is expected to be discussed in the next Caracal meeting in March, because this question has been put indeed on the table on the future of CIFs. Whatever the name will be, as CEFIC, we believe it's probably much more easy to continue a terminology which is well known and understood by everyone. But it's important that we can continue, that it's taught, and that it's, of course, in full line with all the rules that need to be respected, for instance, competition law.
Thank you very much, Erwin. Excuse me to keep you waiting, but I think, Marko, you wanted to react on this one? You asked me. Okay.
I traveled 5 hours. I would like also to take the floor. And it's also touching my presentation. I think that talking about will CFs exist after the 1st of June 2018 is completely irrelevant. In my point of view, this phrase CF is just a phrase, it's an empty word, unless you fill it up with life. And that's the point. What I mean with filling it up with life is that the CF agreements is the IT structure behind. And this is something that will be important to keep, kind of IT structure and all the agreements that you have behind it. And I don't want to repeat what Erwin just mentioned, what Cyril just mentioned. And in the end, data sharing is obligatory also after 1st of June 2018, and we have already now in parallel the processes which are not so obvious maybe, which went through the inquiry process. There was no CF there, and it worked. And it's going to work also in the future if you call it CF or if you call it differently. You will need an agreement, and you will need minimum requirements for this agreement, like it's in the data sharing regulation. That's my point of view.
Thank you very much, Marko. So please go ahead with your question.
Thank you. As I mentioned before, we are in quite a high number of Cs because the business we are in. And on the topic of data sharing and cost sharing, unfortunately, we have come into a number of disagreements with our respective lead registrants as they try to impose a yearly subcharge of 10% on dossiers that they have already filed in, for instance, 2010 or 2013. Now, your colleagues have mentioned on various occasions that this 10% subcharge per year is not valid unless they have valid reasons. I have discussed also yesterday during a one-on-one with your colleagues that these reasons they come up with are not valid. So they advised us to go for a data sharing dispute. Now, what they then said was that eventually, if we win the dispute, the only thing you as ECHA can oblige the respective lead registrants to is to share the studies for, well, the vertebrate studies and not the other studies, which would, as a conclusion, mean that we would have to do the other studies ourselves. I'm not sure what the use of a data dispute is if we can't reach the relevant studies in any case, if they can still try to impose those annual subcharges without any ramifications if you come in between and say, no, that's not right.
So, thank you for your question. So, I don't know if you don't want to take this question, Marko.
I also think it's not proper to do that, what you're just describing.
And any of my colleagues who want to, Jonathan, maybe you can come to reflect on that? Because the question is at two levels. Huh? The level is number one, the questioning about this unfair increase, and the second question is more philosophical, what to do because you don't have access to the other studies on the vertebrate. So maybe Jonathan.
Yeah, I'm Jonathan Giusto from the data sharing team in Christel's directorate. So indeed, for these annual increases, I think we've made that rather clear in wherever we can. It needs to be very, very thoroughly justified if you can at all. We have a decision of the Board of Appeal on that in the vanadium case, so there's not only us saying that, but also our Board of Appeal has taken a stand. What comes to the limitations of the dispute procedure, indeed, it is understandable that it is frustrating in your situation. We have Article 36 that gives a role for national enforcement to penalize actors that do not share the non-vertebrate data. Unfortunately, that's kind of out of our hands. So it's an issue for national enforcement to follow up on a data sharing dispute decision where the non-vertebrate part cannot be solved on our side. I don't know, Silvia, do you want to add something? Okay. Yeah, we cooperate with enforcement, but in the end, it's in their remit.
Can you hear me? Yes. From the business you are in, we are quite familiar with what you are discussing, as a matter of fact, so it's not a surprise to us. We have also, in certain occasions, and also in this case, but I want to mention it to everyone, we have the SME ambassador in ECHA, and he has intervened in certain cases with success where there was obviously an abuse of situation from the lead registrants, and he has acted as a mediator between all parties. So I think in your case, he has probably already acted or intervened to one way or the other, I don't remember exactly, but I would like to also to mention that you can contact the SME ambassador in case of abuse, and we can act also via this way. So, Jonathan, you wanted to complete?
Maybe I can add something, because what we've seen also in practice is that if we give a positive decision and we give a permission to refer to the vertebrate data, what we give in our decision is also an analysis of the situation, of the arguments that were made. And sometimes that triggers new negotiations. So it helps you to come to a better agreement on the whole package that includes everything. So it is not necessarily so that we make a decision and you're left alone for the non-vertebrate part, but without a decision you also have something in your hands to go back to the negotiation table, because there is also an interest of the data owner to get at least some part of compensation for the data that we would have given otherwise for free. So I would not maybe limit the benefit of the dispute procedure to what we can give you access to, but also what you can do with our advice with a decision in your hands. It's not very tangible, I'm afraid. But
yeah, exactly, because then the two options they would have is, in such a manner, is either forcing us to do an opt-out on the other studies, or having some of their initial costs decreased, or pushing us out of the market. And I'm thinking that they will like option 3.
Maybe we can discuss separately on this case. That's a case we know pretty well actually in ECA. So I invite you to ask your question?
Yeah, hello. I'm Gustav Könnecker from Fraunhofer Institute in Hanover, Germany. And we support and in some cases represent some manufacturers from non-EU companies and EU companies in fulfilling their obligations. And my question goes to Marko as well. And it's also related to the very strong position of the lead registrants. Marko, I would support your assumption that by far most of the CF agreements and consortium agreements are okay, are fair and with transparent costs in them. But we have a very few cases where we have offers for LOAs, which have on the one side quite expensive costs in them, and on the other side a very poor dossier quality. Maybe that they will meet the requirements of the TCC, of the technical completeness, but it's very probable that they will run into several updates improving dossier quality. In all cases, the lead registrant is reluctant or even not willing to update his dossier and improve his dossier before registration, even if we are willing to help him and assist him. Many of them seem from non-EU countries. And so the expensive costs will even be higher in the future for us, which is of course not fair to my understanding. I didn't expect a solution right now from you, but I would ask for your meaning, for your...
I think this is, at least in my understanding, this is not something that's fair in the sense of the data sharing regulation. It's just not fair because he's not treating you as you're expecting him to do it. And I think this is a classical thing where you have the possibility of an opt-out, and probably that's an expensive option to do. This is the only thing what I see, because I think that you cannot force a lead registrant or you as a co-registrant to have data quality which you would find adequate. And in that sense, this is one of the reasons for an opt-out. If it's then cheaper, I would doubt it. So.
Yeah, Mercedes, you would like to complement the reply?
Yes, hi on this. Oh, this is very tall. There, that's better. So on these kind of situations, there is also another option. If it's not only you as a co-registrant, but if there is a number of companies in the CIF and you all feel that the lead registrant is not representing what you would expect from a joint submitted data, I think Crystal made it very clear. The information that the lead submits is on behalf of the members. So if a number of you feel that the lead is not representing all of you because you would like to have a different set of data, you can also contact us and we can eventually take action as well if you feel that another company would be in a better position to make a better dossier. But you need to have tried to discuss this kind of thing as well.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I would like to complement that because indeed there are a number of dossiers that have not been through compliance yet, but we are aware of the quality of this dossier. And you really have to pay attention really on the story of waivers. I mean, if you have a dossier which is full of data waivers, read across, QSAR for long-term study, while we all know that QSAR are not ready for long-term studies, or you see a dossier which is with a lot of literature reference, but you could also question the lead registrant if they have the copyright. I mean, that's the type of question you should ask and then consider seriously opt-out, or as Mercedes says, see a different possibility, but don't embark yourself with a dossier of this type of quality, as we are aware it exists unfortunately in our database.
Okay, thank you.
May I would like just to add something. When I said before that the dossier will be more expensive when you opt out, the dossier will be more expensive when you submit it, but probably then when you go into an evaluation process, then you have a benefit. So eventually there we'll have a level playing field after 1-2 years. So I think in the end it pays out because you also have the better information and for your supply chain. Don't misunderstand me on that. You shouldn't be stingy and take bad quality for your dossier.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Hello. Andrei Strikalov, Evras, and my question is not only to ECHA but to lawyers as well. I was worried when I heard that actually companies who pre-register their substances but somehow haven't registered it yet and will not register it till 2008 deadline due to factors, for example, lack of import in the EU. They have to follow the inquiry procedure. But here's the question. According to nowhere in the text, in the legal text, we may see that pre-registration number becomes invalid after the latest deadline. It's the first point. And then we have a certain definition of a phase-in substance that is not related to pre-registration at all. And according to Article 6, every potential registrant of a phase-in substance who has not pre-registered have to follow the inquiry procedure. But if we have a phase-in substance pre-registered, not registered till the latest deadline, but why should they follow the inquiry procedure? It's not according to the legal text.
Yes, so I think it's a question for ECHA, actually, if I may. I will pass to the lawyers, but actually I would like to say that there is no surprise you will not see anything in the text on the pre-registration number because it doesn't exist, the pre-registration number, from a legal perspective. It has been created by the IT system for practicality reasons. So no wonder that you cannot find any reference to pre-registration number in the legal text, but maybe Cyril, you want to complement.
Yeah, Christelle mentioned this morning that there are some questions around the nature of the phasing scheme. And there will be most probably clarification from the Commission in the form of an implementing regulation, and I guess the purpose will be to clarify that. So I expect that we will have clarity on that when we will have this document. Now, very briefly on your question, the phase-in scheme is a set of conditions that operators need to meet in order to benefit from the right of staying on the market, basically. And you have successive conditions. The last one is submitting a registration by the deadline which corresponds to the tonnage. After that, there is nothing. It's over. So people that will not submit by the deadline the registration, there is no phasing scheme anymore.
Then why pre-registration number were valid, for example, tonnage above 1,000 ton after the first deadline? why we could still use the same registration in order to register later.
We're not going to spend a lot of time on that, but the point is that those people were not able to use that number for that tonnage at that time. They could still now submit import, for instance, 10 ton today, but so the number was still valid, but not for this tonnage for which they initially registered. So that there was a decreasing thing, and now we reach the last deadline, and after that, it's zero.
No,
so they don't have the opportunity to go on the market. But I think we're not going to go in these discussions now.
But it would be more wiser, for example, for ECHA to allow those who pre-registered to register after the deadline using pre-registration number, because they pre-register it. They wanted to benefit from the transitional regime, yes, but somehow, due to many reasons, there could be many reasons they didn't register. Lack of import or something, but the situation may change after this 2010 deadline, and they will need to follow this time-consuming and money-consuming inquiry procedure. And it's
the last comment, and then we can also discuss separately. But again, ECHA does what is in the legal text, and I think Cyril tried to give the legal interpretation. And I don't know if somebody else wants to comment on that, but Cyril,
thank you.
You have nothing else.
The condition is for people that have pre-registered by 2018. Now they have to submit a registration, and that is it. After that, this is over. There is no other deadline where they can come back and stay. So the question is, by that time, they are not entitled to be on the market or to manufacture or import the substance. Then they have to come as newcomers.
And also the thing that I would like to say about the inquiry process, the data that you have to provide in inquiry is nothing else than the data that you have to provide for your registration dossier. So it's exactly the same data. The fact that you go via an inquiry to have an assessment by ECHA anywhere is the exact information you will have to put in your registration dossier after. We receive approximately 15 inquiries per day these days, and the team managed to continue to process them at the same speed so that we don't prevent people to go on the market. So I would encourage you to get acquainted with the inquiry process and try to use it. So do we have any other questions? Do you have, Maurizio? Or is there anybody else in the room? We still have a couple of minutes.
Yes. Thanks, Crystal. Maurizio Roncaccio from the ECHA Communication Unit. With my colleague Theo, we have been moderating questions following a very basic democratic approach. The most voted will be asked. Unfortunately, there is not enough time, but I'll start with the first one. So when registering a full Annex 17 dossier, including tests and robust study summary, how to calculate the joint submission costs for members who only want to join for intermediate use?
So I don't know from the panel who would like to take this question, or do you want to give a try?
Yes, of course. So we have been in this situation as well, and it's a bit difficult situation because basically you do not have a data requirement for an intermediate. However, the registrant for the intermediate dossier will make use of the data for his STS classification data. So I think that there should be a pragmatic approach, basically. So what we do is, in general, it would be calculated as a kind of administrative fee. And but in some cases, you could also consider to calculate the Annex 7 costs. I think it's really dependent on the registrant and maybe also on the data you have. So on the number of registrants. So it's really difficult to give one solution here, I think. Maybe Marcus has something to say?
Okay.
Well, formally you need to provide the information for intermediate that's available to you. When we are below 1,000 tons for a transported isolated intermediate, and that means available that you don't have to buy information from your co-registrants. As simple as it is. And then you go into discussions, okay, if you want to use information that is relevant for other legal obligations, just for example, Annex 7 is going to be relevant for your obligations in the transport of dangerous goods legislation, or you will need something for the safety data sheet, you will need something for the classification and labeling. And I mean, as better you get it presented, as easier it's gonna be for you. And if you're willing to pay a price for that, you do. If you're not willing to, you don't. That's really a matter of choice then. And also maybe a bit of fairness when others have collected very good information and you want to use it. I mean, you should also be willing to pay for good data.
Yeah. Thank you. Still time for one question?
Thanks for your answer. So we'll go to the next one. What is your advice for downstream users if a supplier does not register a pre-registered substance, which has not been pre-registered by ourselves?
That I think Mercedes has replied to this question already that was raised. So
we can then go to the next one. After the registration deadline on 31st of May, the company that for the first time actually they come into the EU market. So is the registration dossier needed immediately before coming to the EU market if the tonnage is above 1 ton per year? And how to calculate the tonnage for registration dossier?
So who wants to take the, I don't want to talk all the time, so who wants to take, one of my colleagues maybe, Mercedes, can I invite you? I hope you listened carefully to the question before I ask you.
Yes, you're supposed to have a registration active, let's say, before you put the substance into the market. If it's a first time, you will have to go through the inquiry process, which, as Crystal said, we are making all efforts to make sure it doesn't take too much time. So that was the first part of the question. And then on the calculation of tonnage, well, this is what we discussed this morning. We're waiting for clarification from the Commission on this.
So with that, I would say that we stop this session. Thank you very much for your attention. Do we have the result of the poll, by the way, to show on the screen? I hope it has brought some benefit. More information on substance properties. Okay. Okay, thank you very much for this information. And now I would like, just to give you some indication, we take the lunch break. We will be back at 2:30 in this room. And lunch will be available on this floor directly as this morning behind you on your left. Thank you very much.